Hey, what's up YouTube? Welcome back to the channel. It's Christine with gaugegirltraining, an online meal planning and coaching service. In today's video, I'm going to talk about carb tolerance and 4 factors that impact your personal carb tolerance level. So let's get started. So what is carb tolerance? Carb tolerance is the optimal amount of carbohydrates that an individual can consume on a biochemical level. And you have to realize that there is a spectrum. Now, on one end of the spectrum, you have pre-diabetics and diabetics, and these are people who cannot consume carbohydrates without it throwing their metabolism out of whack. The other end of the spectrum, there are folks who struggle to gain lean muscle, have a very high metabolism, are endurance athletes, and can eat tons and tons and tons of carbs without gaining an ounce. And the reality is most of you guys are going to fall somewhere within this spectrum. And what I've learned over the last decade of working one-on-one with people regarding their nutrition and health goals, working with over 40,000 individuals, is this. Carb tolerance sets the entire tone for how you should end up setting up your macronutrients. It sets up the entire relationship with how your body is going to respond under certain conditions, and there is no right or wrong carb tolerance level. It is just what your carb tolerance level actually happens to be. Carb tolerance is impacted by 4 factors. Number 1, glucose metabolism. Number 2, sex hormones. Number 3, digestive enzymes. And number 4, gut health. So we're going to break it down and get into each 4 of these factors. So the first factor is glucose metabolism, and how readily your body can obtain usable energy from carbohydrates defines the efficiency of your glucose metabolism. So when you eat carbs, it causes your body to have a spike in blood sugar. That causes your body to release insulin from the pancreas. Insulin is the messenger hormone that takes glucose out of the blood and into the cells. If you are inefficient in your glucose metabolism, what's going to happen is insulin is not able to move the glucose out of the blood and into your cells. And what ends up happening in that case is your body will release more insulin and more insulin and more insulin because your body is desperately trying to lower blood sugar because that's a toxic environment for the body. The problem is when your cells are not able to receive that usable energy, your body is starving on a cellular level, which means your glucose metabolism is inefficient. This is also known as insulin resistance. You can quantify this by getting blood work done. You can get your hemoglobin A1C levels tested. If your A1C levels are less than 5.7, you are normal. Between 5.7 and 6.4, you are pre-diabetic. Over 6.4, you are diabetic. So this is something that you can conclusively get measured. Another measurement is also your fasting blood glucose. If that value is over 100, that is a conclusive way to know if this situation applies to you. And what that means is if it does apply to you, it means you would probably do better getting more of your calories from other sources such as fats and proteins as opposed to relying on carbohydrates because your body is not able to efficiently access glucose for energy. So the second factor that impacts your carb tolerance level is your sex hormones. Now, the hormones do not function in a vacuum, and specifically, all of the body's hormones determine how the body deals with food. When your sex hormones are imbalanced, they introduce shifts in your mood, your stress levels, your metabolism, and digestion, among many other functions. And the reality is sex hormones can become imbalanced regardless of whether or not you are overweight. It can happen due to stress. It can happen due to drinking too much. It can happen due to poor quality sleep. It can happen due to eating processed carbohydrates that are highly refined on a regular basis. And if your sex hormones are out of whack, you are not alone. And it is going to change how your body handles carbohydrates. So what you guys need to understand is that when the sex hormones decline, specifically estrogen, and this happens during menopause, and this happens in women who have PCOS, polycystic ovarian syndrome. When this happens, it causes erratic fluctuations in your blood sugar. And blood sugar management is absolutely critical in navigating menopause and the years leading up to it. So specifically, you can no longer make random food choices and just not consider their impact on your hormones, because you are going to pay for it royally. And the resulting distress is simply not worth that temporary pleasure. The reality is, when estrogen levels drop, the body does become more resistant to insulin, which means that the cells, the liver, the muscles, and the brain require more insulin per unit of glucose in the blood in order to shuttle that glucose into the cells. And as a result, the sugar spends more time in the blood, making it more likely that the body will store it as fat. So this is definitely an issue where your management of your food, your management of the types of carbs, your meal timing is so crucial to feel optimal. So now we know what happens when your estrogen levels are too low, but what happens when they are too high? So there is a state called estrogen dominance, and this is when your estrogen levels are high relative to your progesterone levels. And when this happens, it can cause weight gain, abdominal belly fat, which I call hormonal belly, breast sensitivity and tenderness, fatigue, bloating, depression, mood swings, and the list goes on and on. And the problem is, if you are in a state of estrogen dominance, you are not going to be as responsive to typical caloric deficits, because what happens is your body is missing key nutrients, which is the reason why it is in a state of estrogen dominance to even begin with. If you just start arbitrarily cutting calories and you find that you're not losing weight, if you find that you still have stubborn belly fat, you are a candidate that needs to reconsider how you eat. And what you first need to do is you first need to rebalance your hormones before you even focus on a deficit, because your body will not be able to part with stored body fat in an imbalanced environment. The next thing that impacts your carb tolerance that a lot of you guys may not have heard of is the quantity of the digestive enzyme amylase that you have in your body. So 1 in 4 people actually suffer from an indigestion related to insufficient digestive enzymes in the body. And the amount of amylase in people's bodies tends to be genetic, and it can be measured by testing for the quantities of the AMY1 gene in the body. And it's really interesting. Researchers have found a direct correlation between the number of AMY1 copies and how long ago somebody's ancestors have transitioned from more of a hunter-gatherer to a more agricultural-based society. So specifically, agricultural societies such as Asian farming societies have evolved to have more copies of the AMY1 gene. And it's really interesting. I'm actually half Asian. My whole family, we can just eat and eat and eat lots of white rice. It doesn't really impact us that much when it comes to our ability to drop body fat. So know that if your AMY1 gene levels are low, know that it may just be a genetic predisposition. There's not much you can do about it, nor should you worry about it. It's one of those things, it is what it is, and it just gives you the opportunity to alter and tweak how you eat as a result. So last but not least, item number 4 is gut health. And the reality is people tend to mistake gut health issues with carb tolerance issues. And it's very important to delineate between the two, because gut health issues tend to stem from bacterial imbalances. And if you have a hard time processing certain foods due to an inflammatory response in your body, it doesn't necessarily mean that you have a tolerance to carbs. It just means that specific foods and specific carbs impact your body, and it's a matter of learning how to cherry pick the appropriate foods for your body so that way you can avoid these inflammatory responses. So if this is you, you may be the type of person who has an autoimmune disease, or you may be the type of person who would benefit from going on a FODMAP diet. So FODMAP is an acronym that stands for fermentable oligosaccharides, disaccharides, monosaccharides, and polyols. As a result of that, there are specific foods that are as innocuous as garlic and onions that are considered high in FODMAPs and produce inflammation and gas inside the intestines of some people, it doesn't mean that you necessarily need to go low carb. It just means that the chemistry of specific foods does not break down properly in your body. So if you are wondering what your carb tolerance level is, you are in luck, because I dig very deep into this topic in my upcoming book that you guys can pre-order. It's available on Amazon, Target, Barnes & Noble, and all places books are sold. My book releases on March 8th, 2022, which is coming up very quickly here. I have a quiz in there all about carb tolerance levels, and you can also comment below whether or not you believe you have a carb tolerance issue, because what I've found is that this just sets the foundation for how I should set up your macros. And a lot of times people who have some food intolerances here and there, they think they need to go low carb, but if you don't actually have a glucose metabolism issue, you may not necessarily need to cut your carbs. So keep that in mind, you guys. If you have comments, questions, concerns, please let me know. Thank you so much for joining, and I will see you on the next one.